Hey everyone, I wanted to go over some new and exciting news that we got for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak that's set to launch next summer in 2022 for both the Nintendo Switch and on PC via Steam. And just like I talked about a few days ago, the director for the game, Suzuki, started to pretty much provide us with brand new information through their official, not just the Japanese official Monster Hunter Rise Twitter account, but also the official North American Monster Hunter account, basically starting to drop us information regarding for the game. Because they did originally mention in the Japanese tweet a couple of weeks back that this would be pretty much a long road, a pretty much long wait in order for the game officially to launch. Remember that it is launching next summer, so we're pretty much almost a year away, or at the very least 9 to 10 months away. They're going to be pretty much, dropping little bits of information and not necessarily big chunks or like huge reveals or anything like that until they have Capcom specific presentations, but nonetheless they're still dropping information that we should definitely be able to cover as best as possible, that at the very least creates for good conversation heading into next year. And officially the Japanese Monster Hunter Rise Twitter account first tweeted about this, but then the North American one followed it up, and essentially they're saying that at the very least in the Japanese one, I'm going to translate officially what they said. It says that in Sunbreak, obviously Master Rank will be introduced, and not only that new monsters will be appearing in Master Rank, but also powerful individual monsters that appeared in Monster Hunter Rise will also be having brand new additional attacks whenever the game launches, so you need to be careful. As I've alluded to in the past, the Japanese tweets and the English ones do vary from little to little pretty much, but what the English one actually reads is, it says, Hunters, a new quest rank, in parentheses, or in quotations I should say, Master Rank will await you in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hunt new monsters in Master Rank Quest, but prepare to fight some powerful versions of monsters that you clash with in Monster Hunter Rise, some of which will strike with brand new attacks. They also put out another tweet that basically said the subtitle Sunbreaks come from the imagery shown in the game's story, such as the visual sun shining down on the world through the clouds. And they simply closed off that Twitter chain by also posting that to play Sunbreak, you'll need Monster Hunter Rise, obviously the base version of the game, and have taken down Thunder Serpent Narwa at the 7-star hub quest, Serpent Goddess of Thunder, the final quest as the version 1.0. So obviously there's a lot of things here to take and pretty much dissect if we want to, starting with obviously the fact that you do need to have beaten pretty much Thunder Serpent Narwa to have been able to have access to Sunbreak. This is pretty much something that they did, I believe, in like Iceborne and stuff like that. You needed to have beaten the game, at the very least gotten to a pretty far point in the story in order for you to be able to start pretty much Iceborne in the way the game actually launched. So that's not necessarily much of a surprise there. It is interesting that they're telling you basically you needed to have just beaten Narwa and not necessarily Allmother. Perhaps that's a little bit interesting because clearly Allmother was the ending of the game, the true ending of the game, at the very least the way they presented it, although obviously it still continues story-wise. But it is interesting they're taking it that way. I don't necessarily know why they would have chosen that. Maybe they just don't want to necessarily put the force people essentially to go back and do Allmother Narwa and stuff like that if they pretty much just dropped off after the game launched. Remember that Allmother Narwa, I believe, dropped like 2.5, almost 3 months after the game originally came out in March. So perhaps that is why they don't necessarily want to gate people off and force them to eventually make their way back into the game. But it is interesting that pretty much the 1.0 update was pretty much the starting point for Sunbreak. So in that regard, that is appealing to some people, I presume. The stuff regarding the Sunbreak naming convention, essentially that is basically based off of the clouds and the sun shining down through the clouds, I don't necessarily get it. Pretty much all we've seen so far is that castle scenario, that castle scene, and that's pretty, dark. It's pretty much a gloomy atmosphere, a pretty dreary area, not necessarily all that sunny or sun-baked for that matter. So, we'll just have to wait and see what other areas they end up showcasing that pretty much would, I guess, supply the understanding as to why Sunbreak is the subtitle for this game. But obviously, I guess the biggest takeaway here is just, of course, to talk about Master Rank. Now, this isn't necessarily new. Master Rank is what they call G Rank nowadays. So, it is what it is. G Rank is Master Rank. That's not a big surprise. What they do talk about here, though, is that there's obviously going to be new monsters appearing just specifically for Master Rank only. Now, this is something that we've already seen with Iceborne and even other older games in the past, and even we saw with Monster Hunter Rise to begin with. Remember that Nargacuga and I believe Rajang and maybe even a few others were just high-rank monsters to begin with. You don't necessarily get to fight them in normal rank to begin with. So you definitely have to be able to have reached a certain point or a certain amount of star quest in order for you to be able to have access to like Nargacuga and Rajang. And I believe there might be 1 or 2 other monsters. So that's not necessarily a surprise, but it is interesting that when it comes to Master Rank and essentially G Rank, they're pretty much doing that same thing again. And other games have done that in the past. So that is interesting that they're just simply continuing that same experience. What I do find interesting is the wording, and again, in the reason why I read the Japanese one and the English one is because the wording is a little bit different, and it does make me wonder what they actually are trying to say, because in the English one they do say prepare to fight more powerful versions of monsters that you already fought in Monster Hunter Rise. Well, by default, G Rank and or Master Rank is already a more powerful version of that. But are they actually perhaps suggesting subspecies? Perhaps would subspecies be something like only available in Master Rank or G Rank? Would that be the actual meaning that they're trying to get at without actually saying it? Obviously, we don't necessarily know. Would deviants even be qualified in that regard, you know? Or what they're calling now apexes? Would that be something that they're going to try to do? We don't necessarily know, and I think that's what creates interesting conversation regarding the meaning of what they're actually trying to get at, which, you know, is really up to interpretation, because in the Japanese one, they very much make it sound like there will be new versions of monsters, you know, when it comes to Master Rank, but in the English one, they just kind of make it sound like it's just a more powerful version of the same monster you already fought, which is just, again, it really leaves it kind of vague, and it's up to however you want to interpret it. Now, the last thing that they do mention is obviously that these monsters will also have brand new attacks to come along with them, so that's not necessarily new. Obviously, like even Magnamalo, which is showcased in one of the images that they show, you know, Magnamalo, we know in high rank he has new moves and stuff like that. So, you know, we know Apexes, for example, have new moves differing from the basic ones. So we know that Apex Sinogre can do different moves than normal Sinogre. Like Mitsuzune, for example, can do that Soul Fire attack where the normal Mitsuzune cannot. So that's not necessarily all that new. They're saying that G rank and or Master Rank, again, the same thing, is going to have that same, you know, difference as well, where monsters are going to be able to have their brand new attacks. And that is appealing to some degree. It does create that there's going to be that gap of challenge, essentially that thing people have been hoping for, which is just flat out just more difficulty. Be able to fight maybe just the same monsters, but in a much higher difficult status. You know, we have been seeing with the event quests that they're providing us, which are a little bit tougher than the previous ones. Hopefully they can keep that up. I'm not necessarily sure they have enough event quests to provide us for an entire year, as they keep ratcheting it up the difficulty as we get to Master Rank. You know, I would presume that eventually they will drop an event quest with parameters that a monster is going to be pretty close to Master Rank. But, you know, when we actually get to that point, you know, it's entirely up to them. So we don't necessarily can just sit here and speculate, you know, how long that's actually going to take. But at the end of the day, it is cool that they're actually finally talking about Sunbreak in a quality way, where we're actually getting details as to what the game will actually have and what changes we can definitely expect. So going forward, I expect these developer updates from Suzuki to hopefully give us a little bit more insider knowledge, as pretty much what we have been seeing the past couple of weeks. But that's going to be all the information that I have for you guys today. Hopefully you did find it informational and you are definitely getting excited for Sunbreak. But again, remember that the game won't be launching for another perhaps 9 to 10, maybe even 12 months. So it will be a while for essentially for it to drop. But if you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.